In this video, we'll discuss the features on Billy Carson's face that point to broad and intuitive thinking, as well as his likely overuse of persuasion. Enjoy. Welcome back, everyone. Today's video is going to be a bit longer than what I normally do. And the reason for that is I want to talk about Billy Carson. So the way I want to lay this out is I want to talk about what's happening right now in Billy Carson's life terrain. I want to give you the orientation to what's creating conflict. He's trending right now on YouTube. He's found himself in some hot water. Nothing illegal, nothing criminal. But I want to kind of lay that story out, talk about his facial features in terms of the symbolism of what his face carries, what it means for him, the congruency I'm seeing between his face and the life path he's chosen, and then his life force expression in relation to the conflict he's going through. Because in the end, face reading ultimately is about identifying the symbolic themes, according to theory, that your face carries and the aptitude you carry as a result of that, but then also not overusing that aptitude. And that's one of the biggest pieces of face reading, is that face reading theory says the elements your face carries, you got to use those. You're naturally wired to do those things. That's why we have musicians in the world and artists and scientists. Some people are just wired slightly differently. So you got to use the gifts that you've got, but then again, you have to not fall prey to overusing that, because if you do, underuse of an aptitude or overuse of an aptitude will deplete you. And I think in this case, Billy Carson overused the aptitude he was given, and it's causing some life force depletion now. So that being said, let me lay out what happened. Billy Carson has a platform called Forbidden Knowledge, and his wheelhouse is about metaphysics, ancient civilizations, alternative perspectives on Christianity, manifestation. That's sort of the stuff that he talks about and that he teaches. So that being said, he's also made the claim that he is a leading authority in the world on biblical stuff, biblical texts and these kinds of things. And he talks about how he's read all of these ancient texts and he knows a lot. He's one of the leading people in the world. He's made that claim. So Billy Carson found himself in a debate with a biblical scholar named Wes Huff. You can go on YouTube and if you search it in, you're going to see all the videos cropping up right now about it. In this video, in the podcast episode, Wes Huff essentially catches Billy in, let's say a less than favorable position. So without going too deep into it, Billy Carson makes the claim at one point in the video that Jesus was not crucified in this text called the Sinai Bible, also called Codex Sinaiticus. And then Wes Huff counters and says, well, actually, pulls it off of his shelf, pulls the book out, and says, I have the Codex Sinaiticus right here. It's in the British Library or this British Museum, and says, well, like right here, and in a few places, it says he was crucified. So whether you believe in Jesus and the story of Jesus or not, in this realm where he's saying, well, if you're going to say that, and we're basing this off of texts, right, ancient texts, here it is right here, that's not the case. Then Billy, I think, goes on to ChatGPT maybe, or he does something on his phone to check and to sort of say, well, maybe, maybe I had that wrong. And then he says, no, I misquoted, my mistake. I was actually talking about the Gospel of Barnabas. And then Wes Huff counters with a very eloquent response about how that's a known forgery. And he cites the historical reasons why, the things in the story that don't land. And so he was saying, in my field of like true biblical scholars, no one uses this text as like something as valid to lean on. And so when confronted with those two talking points, Billy concedes the point. Well, if you say it's a forgery, I'll go with that. And he sort of just nods along with it. Now, for someone who has been teaching for years and using and referencing these documents as the basis for his orientation to this, he gets caught. And it doesn't go well. And there's a lot in the debate. They go back and forth. I found Wes Huff to be very polite. He was very politely trying to correct Billy and saying, what he was really trying to get Billy to understand was hey, if you're going to teach this stuff, you need to have a very clear and concise methodology on how to vet your sources, because there are forgeries. There are things that aren't necessarily true within this field. And if you're going to cite texts, you better make sure that you have a method to make sure they're correct. So that being said, I don't think that message landed for Billy. And he ended up making a 3-hour response video to it where he doubled down and really just, tried to point out all the reasons on why these people were trying to manipulate him and it was a setup. It wasn't a good look. And moreover, he's now suing the podcast host, and I think he's suing Wes Huff. And I think what happened was he realized that this interview really portrayed him as not as credible as he would have liked. And I think his ego was triggered, and I think he doubled down and just he kind of went on the offensive. So that's the orientation to what's going on. But I want to talk about his facial features and talk about the strengths I'm seeing and the things that he's doing, the congruency and the theory, and then again, life force expression at the end. So the things that I were drawn to right out of the gates when I was looking at his face were his eyes, the spacing of his eyes, and his forehead. These were the things that leapt out to me first and foremost. Now, his eyes carry something called sanpaku. Sanpaku relates to the 3 whites. So if you look at my eyes, when my face is level, you'll see the 2 whites on both sides, okay? These little triangular wedges. Those are the 2 whites. But the moment we start seeing the bottom white, that's called the 3 whites. San means 3. Sanpaku relates to the 3 whites of the eye. In face reading, this is less than favorable. What it means is life force depletion. And so that means sometimes the person can have discrepancies in their physical health. They might leak, but it also points to this mechanism of energy leaking out very fast. It's sort of like the energy can leave very quickly. The person can become very depleted very fast if they're not careful. So his eyes are very sedate. They don't move a whole lot. He doesn't have a lot of movement around the eyes. And people in the comments, were less than kind and saying he has dead eyes. I never trusted him. People are really jumping on the bandwagon to attack this guy. And I understand he was kind of caught in a less than favorable position, and people, when there's a train wreck of sorts, people really want to watch and they want to throw in fuel to the fire. And I don't think that's the best method to help people in general. I don't think that's a good thing to do. But that being said, his eyes do run that way, which means life force depletion, and he's currently in a state where things are depleting. He's in a state of conflict in terms of his life terrain because his fan base did not like that 3-hour video. He ended up deleting it. I think his wife had posted it as well. I commented on that one and was saying like, hey, this didn't go well, for these reasons, and it's not good to double down here. So the point is, he's got this feature. He's currently living that out to a degree, but the spacing of his eyes, wide. When the eyes are wide in face reading theory, that means the person has a capacity to really see the long view, the big picture of things. They can look at many things and sort of distill down and filter pretty well, but they do have a very broad spectrum, long view perspective and approach to how they see things. So given his field and what he's studying, he needs that and he's using it. Big open perspective, really having his hands into a lot of different things to form his ideas. He's also got a big, broad, open forehead. The forehead is indicative of the mind and how the mind operates. He's got a big, open forehead, and it's pretty clear, which means big, open mind. This is not a narrow thinker. Billy Carson is wired to think broad and big, and he's doing that in his work. He's also got connected forehead lines, which are favorable in face reading. When the forehead lines connect, that means cohesiveness of thought, usually. The person is able to articulate their ideas very well. I also call these lines storyteller lines, because what I've seen over the years is when people's forehead lines do connect, they usually articulate their ideas very well. You can see this in Jordan Peterson. You can see this in a number of my face reading videos when I talk about these lines. People that have these lines typically form their thoughts very well, which he does. With the storyteller lines comes persuasion. Persuasion is a beautiful thing. It can give us influence. But just like in the Spider-Man lore, that line that comes out of the Spider-Man story, with great power comes great responsibility. So you've got to be careful not to overuse your persuasion. And so the other thing, the big theme I saw in his face was the water element. This is characterized by soft, rounded features and also a cool, calm, and tranquil look on the face, which Billy Carson has. There's something very still and kind of quiet about his energy. What that means is in the symbolic terms is the water element relates to fascination, awe, and wonderment. It relates to the cosmos. It relates to philosophy, deep spiritual thought, and philosophical thought, which Billy Carson is absolutely living in his life. So what's good here is that Billy Carson has these features and he has chosen a life path that is conducive for him to use these things. But like any of us, we can overuse them. And so this brings me into the expression of what's happening after the fact. Billy Carson has all of these features, these persuasive abilities to a degree, right? It's a very favorable thing if you wield it appropriately, but you have to not overuse it. I think what happened here is that he was caught in a position where, again, he's been citing these sources for years. And he made the case that I had been very sick, which he had been. He had been in the hospital prior to this interview, and he was saying his head wasn't on straight, and that's why he misquoted and said things wrong. But that doesn't really hold up if you go back and look at his old content. He references the Sinai Bible many times and saying, like, this is the proof of why Christ wasn't crucified, like it's not here. And then Wes Huff said, well, this is not a good source for these reasons. And instead of integrating that and saying, maybe I should go back to the drawing board and admit that maybe I had that wrong and had more to learn, he doubled down. And it really has not gone well for him. And people are pretty upset with him because of that. I think if Billy Carson had simply just been more watery, if he had behaved more like water, which his face naturally carries, and just had been humble, had some fundamental basic humility, like, maybe I had that wrong, that is a good thing. That's what allows us to grow. I can use myself as an example. I teach face reading, and am I a master who knows all? No, I'm not. I would say I have a developing expertise, and it continues to grow, and I'm learning more and more all the time. The more people I read, the more I practice face reading, but I'm going to get some things wrong. How could I not? And there might come a point in my teaching when I say, hey, I met someone else in Lillian's lineage, and they actually made a very good case of why I've had this wrong. Now, does that make me bad fundamentally because I had it wrong? No, it makes me human. And I think that's the thing to remember here is that Billy Carson, in states of conflict, really needs to be adaptable and adopt humility. The water energy is big on that. It's the sage energy, and the sage is humble. And if you don't know how to be humble, it's really going to cause some sizable conflicts. He also doesn't have very strong eyebrows. The eyebrows relate to the wood element. That's about vigor, drive, and pushing, being aggressive in how you get your points across and how you navigate life. It's the battering ram energy of life. The jawline is the root of that system. So the jaw and the eyebrows relate to wood and how much aggression we can push out. His 3-hour rant definitely leaned into wood metrics, which his face doesn't naturally carry. The wood energy is about being aggressive. He deleted that 3-hour video, but it was a lot of finger pointing, and there wasn't much in there about like, hey, I just had it wrong, maybe. That wasn't even on the table. I was set up, I was manipulated. It was very outwardly directed on how everyone was trying to take advantage of him. It was wood. Wood pushes. Wood is confrontational. And I think he deleted it because, again, the fan base and the comments were just, I think it had like 20,000 dislikes before he pulled it down. So the thing is, I don't have any ill will towards Billy Carson. I genuinely think this man was attempting to help and really wants to help people. I do. And you might disagree with that, and that's cool, right? We all have different opinions, but I don't think it's conducive when people jump on the bandwagon and say this guy is a piece of shit and he was just intentionally manipulative and he was, he's evil. It's like, that's a big leap, I try to assume positive intent in people, and I think that's a good thing here. But if Billy Carson were my lifestyle client, I would say, hey man, confrontation and aggressive confrontation in the space of conflict, when you find yourself in conflict, really isn't the move. So obviously he's not my client. I can't share that with him, but I do hope that he course corrects. And my advice for Billy Carson as a lifestyle client would be, you've got to look at the theme of humility. You've got to really just take a knee sometimes and say, yep, I had that wrong, and there's more to learn. And that is a very good thing, because that, again, points to the beginner's mind. You've got to have that. And so, again, this is a bit more long-winded, but I think this is a really good case study in looking at a person's face, what they carry, and how we express our life and how we navigate conflict. Billy needs to stay watery, humble, tranquil, cool. And the more he leans into those hard, aggressive tendencies, his face just doesn't, it's like that's not the energy that he's most designed to carry. We all need to have hard boundaries sometimes. That's very true. Every person's going to have to learn them, but it's how we wield these things that really points to longevity, health, and understanding of our life force, how our life is expressing. But again, if Billy Carson ends up watching this, hey man, I don't wish you any ill will. And I hope that Billy Carson is able to course correct. But I think that would only happen by becoming water. Cool, tranquil, and humble. That's the biggest thing, is just admitting that maybe you didn't have this correct. And I think the more he doubles down here, and I think the worse it's going to get for him. I hope that's not the case. I hope he's able to kind of course correct and bring everything back to center. But it's going to require humility, and humility is hard. It's very hard. I've been caught in moments like this in my life where I've been very passionate about something and I'm pretty sure I've got it dialed. And then when you don't, it's like, shit, and especially in the sphere of education, when you're publicly teaching and stuff, it can be very embarrassing. You feel like, am I a fraud, right? You go through all of the human tendencies and questions that we all have about, am I full of shit? I hope not, but I really thought I had it right. I can give one last example. I teach Tai Chi and Qigong. I've studied in Vietnam, Thailand, Cambodia, China. I've traveled to the Orient, studied these things. I've dedicated a sizable amount of my life force to studying these things. Am I a master? No, but I probably know more than the average person. There were alignments in reading about these arts. Have relaxed shoulders and a hollow chest. The way I interpreted this, according to the pictures and what they were saying, was soft drooped shoulders and sort of rounding the chest. And what that often does is hunch and round the spine, which means for years I was teaching it to the best of my understanding, but I had people in a less than favorable position. And when I talked to some people, some teachers that I met who were fluent in Chinese and understood the language, they said, actually, no. What they're talking about is actually elevating and making the shoulders a bit more buoyant so that the scapula decompresses and the sensation you feel is hollow on the inside when you're doing it correct. It doesn't mean actually caving the chest. I just had it wrong. And believe me, I was like, God, is everyone going to think I was steering them down the road, the wrong road intentionally? I sure hope not. But I did have to say to my students, new evidence has come to light. I think I had this wrong, and we're going to try these new things because I too am still learning. And that would be the thing that I would be pushing Billy Carson into embracing, is that you still have more to learn. You don't have it all dialed in like everybody, and when you're teaching something, the pitfall is the ego can get involved, and it's like, no, this is how it is, and I've been saying this for years, and your identity gets wrapped up in it. And I think what's happening right now is his ego is being broken. It's being, it's dissolving. And when the ego is threatened, it's usually outwardly not that great. So I know this was a little bit long-winded, but I just thought it would be an interesting thing to talk about in relation to, his facial features, how his life is unfolding, and I wish him the best. I hope things square up for Billy, and I hope he gets, his center back. So that's all I've got for today. Thank you for your time as always.